Hey there, D here. Today we're going over all of the updates relevant to the new week of Mythic plus Keystones. So first up, we've got a little bit of class tuning, mostly for Boomkins and Arcane Mages. So we've got Arcane's Arcane Blast and Arcane Missiles damage have been reduced by 5 and 8% respectively, and Fury has seen a just straight up nerf of 3%. Following that, we've got some class changes that will be happening on the maintenance window on September 17th, which is today. Sand Lane Vampiric Strike chance to trigger increased to 25% was 10. Frenzied Bloodthirst damage of Death Coil and Death Strike increased by 5% per stack was 4. Visceral Strength grants 8% strength was 6. So very nice buffs there for Sand Lane. And that's great because that's been falling behind recently. Blood Sand Lane Vampiric Strike damage increased by 20%. And Infliction of Sorrow deals 15% of the remaining damage over time. Damage was 10%. So nice little buffs for Sand Lane. That is the hero talent that's not being chosen as much at the moment. Alright, and then Havoc's got a couple of bug fixes. Um, Looks like I-beams had some issues. Damage being reduced at one target instead of 5. And didn't benefit from other specific talents. It's nice that that's been fixed. And then we've got our Boomkin Balanced Druid buffs. All ability damage increased by 6%. Star Surge, which is their single target spender, increased by 16%. Star Fall, damage increased by 20%. And Elun's Chosen Lunar Calling increases Starfire's damage to primary target by 80% with 65. So overall, nice buffs. I actually don't know if they needed this too much, at least in dungeons. Because I did a Mythic 0 dungeon with a Boomkin the other day, and they were pumping. But I did notice that in Raids they were falling behind. Alright, Feral changes. Blood Talons and Line Strength no longer also increase the damage of Rampant Ferocity. Developers note in response to feedback that this change reduced the value of maintaining RIP and complicated using Blood Talons and AoE. We are reverting this change. That's kind of sad. I liked the idea of using Rampant Ferocity. I mean, you should always be maintaining RIP, but I like the Rampant Ferocity buffs. And I'm assuming to make up for that, all ability damage increased by 3%, rep damage increased by 6%, ferocious bite damage increased by 3%, feral frenzy damage increased by 10%, and Druid of the Claws ravage damage increased by 3%. All of that feels great because I'm a feral in raid, and those seem like great changes to me. Easy free damage. Alright, and then Resto Druid changes, all healing increased by 8%, Wrath damage, and Starfire and Star Surge damage all increased by 20%. So nice little overall buff for Resto Druids. Now we've got Evoker's Disintegrate damage increased by 10%, and Devastations had their Eternity Surge damage increased by 10%, so really just overall buffs for not just Evokers, but really everyone so far. Except for Fury Warriors and Arcane Mages. Alright, Mages. The Living Bomb's explosion visual now only plays on the unit that is the Living Bomb rather than each unit damaged by its explosion. That'll help some people having issues with any kind of visual bugs or a visual load on their computer. Alright, Arcane, Sunfury, Meteorite damage reduced by 15%. Burden of Power damage for Arcane Blast reduced to 20 was 30. Burden of Power damage bonus for Arcane Barrage reduced to 20 was 30. So even more nerfs for Arcane. And then Fire's got an all-around increase of 6%, and Living Bomb damage increased by 25%. Don't know if that'll bring Fire back up into play with Arcane and Frost right now, but we'll see. Alright, Mistweaver Monks, all healing increased by 3%, Tiger Palm damage increased by 15%, and Rising Sun Kick damage increased by 15%. I didn't think that they were really having issues, but stronger healers are always better. Windwalker, Darting Hurricane's passive trigger rate reduced by 50% and it now reduces the cooldown by the global cooldown by 0.25 seconds was 0.5. So overall nerf, big nerf for Windwalker for that specific talent. Alright, Holy Paladins, all healing reduced by 6%, judgment damage increased by 60%, Crusader Strike damage increased by 60%. Hammer of Wrath damage increased by 20%. Avenging Crusader transfer amount reduced to 260 was 420%. And Holy Prism single target damage increased by 100% and area of effect damage increased by 50%. So overall a healing decrease but damage increase by a lot. I mean, I did see that they were doing pretty well, but that cutting their healing by 6% and then cutting their cooldowns healing by almost half, it seems a bit excessive. Alright, and then Rhett's got Herald of the Sun, Dawnlight damage reduced by 15%. That's a lot too. Alright, Shadow Priest definitely need this buff. All damage increased by 6%. Psychic Link now inflicts 25% of its direct damage to targets afflicted by Vampiric Touch was 30%. I mean, how are you gonna buff them and then just nerf them right after that? That's crazy. Alright, Outlaw Rogue, all ability damage reduced by 4%, dispatch damage reduced by 10%, melee attack reduced by 8%. Let's see, their 2-set grants 35% chance to deal 30% increased. That's a buff from 20 and 15%. And their 4-set was also buffed to stack 15% 4 times, and it was 6% for 3 times. So that's a pretty big buff there that probably undoes all of the nerfs that they put in elsewhere. Alright, Shaman Enhancement. All ability damage increased by 4%, and then some tier set changes. These are nerfs. Reducing cooldowns for the 2-set, and they increase the damage. Oh, I'm sorry. Only the second one was the tier set. First one was Witch Doctor's Ancestry Talent, nerfed to reduce the cooldown. And the tier set has its damage increased. Okay. And then Resto Shaman, Lava Burst damage, Lightning Bolt, and Chain Lightning damage all increased by 12%. Nice. Alright, Demo Warlock has its Demon Bolt damage increased, Pact of... I'm not even going to attempt to say that. Summon Doom Guard damage increased by 45%, Fell Guard damage increased by 15%. I'm sorry, I believe that I saw somewhere that Doomguard has been nerfed. So I wonder if that's including the nerf or if it was something else or if I'm just remembering incorrectly. Alright, Destro Warlock, all ability damage increased by 6%, Dimensional Rift damage increased by 40%, Channel Demon Fire damage increased by 40%. Cool. I wonder if that means that we'll see these two in the Race to World first instead of just Athlock. I do find it funny that they usually don't really care about when Athlock is weaker, but as soon as these other two specs are weaker, they immediately get buffs. Alright. Warrior changes Colossus. Mountain of Muscle and Scars increases damage dealt by 5% was 4. Damage dealt by demolishes 2 initial strikes increased by 20%. Mountain Thane change. Thunderblast, lightning strikes, and ground current damage increased by 6%. Arms change, Blade Storm damage reduced by 10%. Fury changes, Blade Storm damage reduced by 10% as well. Odin's Fury damage reduced by 15%. Mountain Thane, Strength of the Mountain increases. Bloodthirst and Rampage damage by 20% was 15. So overall nerfs for Arms and Fury it looks like, but this is a good change for Prot, at least. Let's see if we've got anything else. Alright, so that's all for these class changes right there. Next up, we're talking about the new engineering item that is basically the replacement of the Brez bracers from Dragonflight. These convincingly realistic jumper cables are basically a free Brez that you can buy, and anyone can use them. You don't have to be an engineer to use them. You don't have to give up an embellishment or, craft a certain item to use them. You can just buy these off the auction house. It's a great way if your comp doesn't have any brezes in it, or if you just want to be the responsible one and have the brez with you, then this is a great way to deal with that. Alright, and then we're talking about the dungeon buffs within the Season 1 dungeons. If you're unaware, then a lot of the dungeons since Dragonflight have had profession, class, or race buffs within the dungeons that you can obtain. So, for example, in Arakawa, the City of Echoes, there's a tailoring buff. There's multiple places that you can see these spiders. They're usually highlighted, like this one in the picture, where if you have a tailor that has at least 25 skill, then they can interact with them and get an on-use ability called Silk Threads. And this Silk Thread is a 10-second stun that works on everything within the dungeon except for bosses. So there are 3, basically right at the beginning of the dungeon. As you go down the stairs, when you get to the very end of the stairs, there's 2 directly on the left and the right of the stairs, and then 1 right across the bridge that's there. And then there's several more within the dungeon as you're going through them. You just have to keep an eye out. So if you've got anyone that's a tailor, this is definitely a great thing to grab, because then you can get that 10-second stun in. Alright, and then in City of Threads, we've got one for rogues, priests, and engineers. And this one is this purple hologram that is located a couple places within the dungeon. The first one is right at the beginning. You just walk straight a little bit and it's on your right. But this gives you a 30-second buff called Stolen Power, and this increases your damage done by 15%, healing done by 15%, and increases your movement speed by 50%. So that's a great little thing to grab when you're doing the first pack within the dungeon. And then in Stone Vault, we've got a interactable for warriors, dwarves, and blacksmiths. It's called an Imbued Iron Bar. This will give you a 10-minute verse buff for 10%. And so that's huge. The only issue is that it's kind of out of the way, so most pugs most likely will not be getting it. Um, this is if you start the dungeon, go to the first boss, turn right, and go towards the duo boss. Then right in the room before that boss, if you go all the way right, there's a little forging area where you can click that bar. All right, and then for one of the returning older dungeons, Mist of Turner Scythe, druids, night elves, taurens, and herbalists can interact with overgrown roots, which are these pictured here, and they can also interact. Um, or no, sorry, that's what they can interact with. There's these roots. These roots are at the very beginning that lets you skip the first couple of packs, and then right before the first boss room, it's this here, which allows you to go in and get these mushrooms in the picture, which then give you stat buffs. And then as well as this, after that first boss, there's a little seed like this down on the left, heading down into the maze, which anyone can interact with, and this will set your respawn checkpoint to this seed rather than the beginning of the dungeon. There's another seed after the second boss, Maze Caller, or Mist Caller, sorry. Um, After you jump down the waterfall, there's another seed down there. Alright, and the Necrotic Wake, this doesn't require any specific player or person. There are several weapons or shields placed throughout the dungeon, um, and they each do a different effect. Basically, the more important ones are this Discharged Anima and Bloody Javelin. So you'll want to look for a guide that tells you where those two are and try to find them and use them every time. Alright, and now we've got some dungeon fixes for Mythic plus Arakara. Um, we've also got changes for Mist, and Siege of Borealis, and Dawnbreaker. Alright, so Mistcaller addressed an issue where Dodgeball was inflicting damage to unintended targets. And then Arakara, City of Echoes. Kikatal, the Harvester. Erupting Webs, stun duration reduced to 3 seconds with 6. Damage reduced by 18%. And Grasping Blood is now susceptible to interrupt effects. Okay, so this is the last boss. Erupting Webs is the ability where she sends out swirlies that if you're in them, they stun you, do a bunch of damage. So being stunned for less is awesome if you aren't able to break out of your route in time to dodge the swirlies. Reduced damage is great, and the Grasping Blood being susceptible to interrupt effects instead of just CC is amazing. Alright, Siege of Borealis. Players can now use both Alliance and Horde portals to enter the dungeon. Leaving the Siege of Borealis now puts players at the correct exit location based on their faction. Janna Proudmoore now teleports players to the correct exit location based on their factions. And Chopper Red Hook, which is the second... Ooh. No, he might be the first boss. Added various visual improvements for the encounter. Hopefully they made the bombs easier to see, because I know that as my healer's running around trying to not die, it's hard for her to see the bombs. And then Dawnbreaker, there is now a worn anvil to repair next to Arathi Lamplighter on the Dawnbreaker. Awesome, because if you weren't aware, you cannot mount normal mounts, so you can't pull out the repair mounts. Alright, and then this is just a little, like, save some gold kind of thing. All your Dragonflight consumables are still work. They're so much cheaper than anything else. Um, so at least for this first week, just keep in mind that you can use these still. It's unlikely that these will continue to be usable after like the first week because typically when the new expansions come out, all older equipment is unusable or they nerf them to the point where it's not good to use. So just use everything that you can this week and keep an eye out for when this is updated. All right, and then this is, excuse me, this is just going over the nerfs again, which we've already been over. So let me know if you enjoyed this. Any questions, comments, concerns you may have. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you'd like to see. Let me know what you're not looking forward to with this. Let me know what you're looking forward to with this. I hope that you enjoy your season. I know I'm going to love this first week and no life the crap out of some keys. All right, hope you enjoyed this. Have a great day.